Hello everyone, here is your video for the 3-2 notes on conditionals and related statements. Um, we are going to learn 5 different patterns today. 2 of them are old, they're from our lesson yesterday, and the new ones are just going to be ways to rearrange and reorder what we started with yesterday. So we learned about if-then statements yesterday. Those are compound statements that relate to ideas with an if and a then. So we said if P, then Q. So today I'm going to add some vocabulary to that. Our P statement is what we call the hypothesis, and our Q statement is what we call the conclusion. And so our conditional statement is going to say if P, then Q. And whatever P is as a statement and whatever Q is as a statement, we put those in place of the letter P and the letter Q. So that's sometimes called a direct conditional statement, but that's your original, that's your P implies Q, that's your starting point. So if we switch the hypothesis and the conclusion, and our statement is now if Q then P, we call that a converse. So that's one way to manipulate your conditional. Another way to manipulate your conditional is to negate the conditional. And we can say not P implies not Q, or if not P, then not Q. If we add those negations, we're writing an inverse. Then the third new one is called a contrapositive. The contrapositive is the biggest word. It does the most work. It switches and negates your statements. So your P implies Q becomes a not Q implies not P, or if not Q, then not P. And then finally, we have a biconditional. That's your if and only if statement. That's your P if and only if Q. Now, the biconditional works as like a forwards and a backwards statement. So it can mean if P implies Q, or it can mean Q implies P. Typically, we are only allowed to write biconditionals if both the conditional and the converse are true statements. But for our examples today, we're going to just practice writing it so we get in the habit of understanding the pattern that goes along with it. So as we go through and work on these different conditionals and related statements, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Our sentences need to start with if. And if they don't start with if, we're going to rewrite it in if-then form. So sometimes you're going to have to add some pronouns or some verbs, and you have a little bit of flexibility when you're doing these by hand. When you go to do them in Alex, then you're going to pick your choices from a drop-down menu. So it's more of a critical reading exercise than it is a critical writing exercise. And you'll see that once you get to the Alex assignments. So again, you typically only write the biconditional if both the conditional and the converse are true. But when we're talking about the truth value of these statements, your conditional and your contrapositive are said to be logically equivalent. That means if one's true, the other one is automatically true. Also, your converse and your inverse are logically equivalent. This is an introduction to a law that we're going to learn about at the end of the unit when we get to deductive reasoning. But as long as you understand the patterns, then you are okay for today. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is a Venn diagram we looked at in the 3-1 notes. So given this guy right here, you can come up with several different conditional statements. So one option is to say if it's a triangle, or if it's in the triangular region, then it's also in the rectangular region, and it's in the circular region. So that's one example of an if-then statement. Another example we can say is if it's in the rectangular region, then it's also in the circular region. So we can use a Venn diagram to help us write conditional statements, and that's what we're going to do to guide us as we work through these couple of examples that we're going to look at together. So the first example that you see in your notes is all cats eat food. So our hypothesis is the cats, and then the conclusion is the eating food. So here is our P, here is our Q. So if we were to take that and put it into Venn diagram form, we would put cats here, and they would fit in the group of people or objects that eat food. So if this is our statement, if this is our Venn diagram, we know that our conditional is going to be a P implies Q statement. And here's where we're going to have to make some changes to the structure of our sentence. So our P idea is cats. So I can't just say if all cats. So I'm going to add in a pronoun. And I don't care if you use he, she, it, they, whatever you want to say. I'm going to say if it's a cat, then it eats food. And I know that that's a little bit sloppy, so I will type that for us. If it's a cat, then it eats food. I have a hypothesis, I have a conclusion, I have an if-then statement. So that's what I'm going to work with as my conditional statement. I know I have a P statement, it's a cat. I have a Q statement, it eats food. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to make the changes to those statements. So I know that my converse is going to be a Q implies P. I know that my inverse is a not P implies not Q. I know that my contrapositive is a not Q implies not P. And I know that my biconditional is the P if and only if Q. So I know those patterns. So now I have to type what those statements are. So if it's a cat, then it eats food, as a converse becomes if it eats food, then it's a cat. I don't care about the truth or falsity of the statement. I am simply going for the pattern. I know that we can come up with several counterexamples, but that's not what we're focusing on now. It's just the pattern to these statements. And then our inverse goes back to the conditional and negates it. If it's not a cat, then it doesn't eat food. And again, you have some flexibility in how you make your verbs when you're writing it by yourself. When you get to Alex, you're looking and reading critically with the choices that they give you. Our next task is to write the contrapositive, and the contrapositive is the not Q implies not P. So I go back to the conditional and I switch it and negate it. If it doesn't eat food, then it's not a cat. And then finally, the last thing that we can talk about and write for today is the biconditional. That's your if and only if statement. Now, guys, this one is weird because it doesn't start with if. All of the other conditionals up until this point start with if, but the biconditional starts with the P statement. It is a cat. It's a cat. And then the phrase if and only if it eats food. So there's only the if and only if phrase in the middle. It's literally the P statement, the phrase if and only if, and then the Q statement. So that is what we're doing. We're coming up with a hypothesis. We're coming up with a conclusion, a P and a Q statement, and then we're rearranging them and putting them together as compound statements. Let's look at another example. I run, then drink Gatorade. So this statement doesn't have an if, but it still has a hypothesis in the form of I run and a conclusion in the form of drinking Gatorade. So we can simply change this one to say, if I run, then I drink Gatorade. So if I run, then I drink Gatorade. And then from there, with that minor change, we can write the converse, inverse, contrapositive, and biconditional. Now, it's important to note that in our examples, the pattern stays the same. So here's a P implies Q, here's a Q implies P, here's the not P implies not Q, the not Q implies not P, and then the P if and only if Q. So that pattern is pretty consistent throughout the notes. But when we get to doing these in real life, or when we get to doing these with our Alex assignment, they're going to be given to you in a different order. So don't get too comfortable with the order of the pattern. Make sure that you understand the pattern itself. All right, so to fill in these couple of examples, the converse is going to say, if I drink Gatorade, then I run. And then the inverse, we're going to go back and negate the conditional. So if I don't run, then I don't drink Gatorade. Again, your verbiage might be slightly different, but as long as the idea is there, you're going to be fine. Our contrapositive, if I don't drink Gatorade, then I don't run. And then finally, your biconditional, this is the one that does not start with if. I run. And then the phrase, if and only if I drink Gatorade. You do need to make sure that the P statement comes first and the Q statement comes second when you're writing the biconditional. But that's all it is. We figure out the hypothesis, we figure out the conclusion, and then we put them in the order for the pattern that we're looking at. All right, the next example that you see is a little bit different. This one says, I swim if it's a Tuesday. So guys, if is already in our statement. So that means that our hypothesis is actually second. So that's our P idea. If it's a Tuesday is the hypothesis, and your conclusion is I swim. So our starting point for this one is backwards. So we're going to rewrite this first as a P implies Q statement. So if it's a Tuesday, then I swim. That is my starting point. So I had to rearrange what I was given to work with what I need. So now that we've done that, we can go through and again, follow the pattern. The converse switches it. So if I swim, then, let's spell swim correctly. Then it's a Tuesday. Let's spell Tuesday correctly, sorry. The inverse is the negation of the conditional. So if it's not a Tuesday, then I don't swim. Your contrapositive is going to switch it and negate it. So if I don't swim, if I don't swim, then it's not Tuesday. And then finally, your biconditional, it's a Tuesday if and only if I swim. So the pattern is there. You just have to get your starting point and then rearrange the hypothesis and the conclusion as needed. Now, sometimes you're going to be given one form of a statement and you're going to be asked to write the other forms. So in this particular example that we're going to look at first, we're given the inverse. And if you think about the pattern for the inverse is the one that says not P implies not Q. So it's not Friday is not P. And then I am not painting is not Q. So if I take that back to the conditional, because my conditional was my starting point, if I take that back to the P implies Q form, my P statement is it's Friday. So I'm going to say if it's Friday, then, now my not Q statement is I am not painting. So my Q statement is I am painting. So we have to understand our entry point to be able to get to the original hypothesis and the conclusion, the original P and Q. So now that we have, if it's Friday, then I'm painting, we can go ahead and write the converse, contrapositive, and biconditional to fill in what we're missing. So the converse just switches it. So if I am painting, then it's Friday. Oops. Our contrapositive, the biggest word, it does the most work. If I'm not painting, then it's not Friday. And then finally, the biconditional, the oddball, it's Friday. If and only if I'm painting. There we go. All right. So as you work through these examples, you need to make sure that you understand what you're given. And then I always go back to the conditional because I think that one is the easiest one to manipulate and to work with. So let's go ahead and look at some additional examples that look like this. Here is the answer key. Let's make that full screen. All right, so example number 5 says our biconditional is our starting point. It's a triangle if and only if it has 3 sides. So from this information, we can figure out that P is the statement, it's a triangle, and Q is the statement, it has 3 sides. So once I have that P and that Q, that allows me to come back up here to the conditional and say if it's a triangle, then it has 3 sides. And then from there, if it has 3 sides, then it's a triangle is my converse because I switched them. My inverse is if it's not a triangle, then it doesn't have 3 sides because, again, I'm adding the negations. I'm adding the nots to the conditional. And then our contrapositive is if it doesn't have 3 sides, then it's not a triangle because I'm switching and negating the conditional. So guys, as you pick up this pattern and as you become comfortable with the ways that the statements are changing and being rearranged, these problems become a little bit quicker and a little bit faster for you to work through. So for number 6, you're given the contrapositive. That's your not Q implies not P. And from there, you can figure out that your P statement is I'm not studying, and your Q statement is I'm not in the library. So that one's a little bit different. So I'm in the library was not Q. So I'm not in the library is going to be Q. And then I'm studying is not P. So when I write the negation of P, it's I'm not studying. So if the negation is there, if the not phrase is there in your statement, you have to take it out, or you have to do the opposite. If it's there, put it in. If it's not there, hold on, I think I'm saying the same thing there. If it's not there, then you add it. If it is there, you take it out whenever you're changing and negating your given statement. So just be careful if you see problems or examples like number 6 in your ALEKS assignment. All right, guys, so for number 7, you're given the converse. That one is a little bit more straightforward. To go back to the conditional, you just have to be able to say, well, this is my Q statement, so that goes second. And then this is my P statement, so that goes first. And then change it accordingly. For number 8, that one you're given the conditional, so that is just like all of the problems that we practiced. That one shouldn't give you any problems at all. Number 9 is the biconditional. It also is very straightforward because you know that it's a P implies Q. So here is my P statement, here is my Q statement. Put those into the conditional and then make your changes for your related conditionals. All right, that is all I have for this video. As long as you understand the patterns, and if you need to reference them as you were working, they are at the top of your notes, right there in that chart. So you have everything that you need in terms of the pattern. When you're working through your ALEKS assignment, you are just reading critically. You're picking the right choice from a drop-down menu. Just be very careful because sometimes it's easy to miss a not or to add a not in when you're reading something because the choices do look very similar. But reference your chart, go back to your notes. Good luck and reach out if you have questions.